Welcome to our last section as we explore animations in React animations. We'll understand how animations work in React as we introduce ourselves to the last major topic in React, which is state. So by the end of this section, you'll know all the core competencies you need to have with React as you build up your animation skills as well. So let's go into our first lecture. Our first lecture is going to be about creating an animation. Woohoo! We're going to use a component, or more accurately, we're going to use a module that we're going to load up, which is called React-Addons-CSS-Transition-Group. And yes, this name is very catchy, but we're going to take a look at how to get things to animate with it in this lecture. So let's go ahead and do that. In many ways, as we were doing throughout this last few chapters, we were modularly building components, and in the last section we started using Sass to enable our Bootstrap to be very customized based on our need. By the way, one thing that you'll notice if you're paying attention is that if you take a peek at our actual HTML, well actually in our source app, our app itself is also sending the text small size center while it's not working, and the reason why it's not working is because we actually never implemented it. It wasn't really part of our core features that we decided to add into our device. With that said, I'm just going to delete it because we're not using it right now, and I want to move on to the next topic. And if I'm already in this area, I'm going to go ahead and kind of disable all those disables. And by the way, I already in advance stopped our server from running, so make sure you do the same. With that said, I'm going to go into our terminal because I want to talk about animation. And to do that in React, there is a plugin, and it's a really great way for you to get familiar with add-ons in React. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install it into our production, and I'm going to install React-Add-Ons-CSS-Transition-Group. Transition group. Yeah, I think I typed that right. If I didn't, we will get an error, which would be fine. Okay, so while it's actually installing, let's go ahead and start actually working with it or setting it up. And to do that, I am going to stay within our bounds of our app. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to import that package. So let me go ahead and do that. It doesn't really matter where I'm going to do it, but let me just go ahead and import. And I'm going to go ahead and give it the name React CSS Transition Group. And I want to load it up from basically the exact same place where we just installed it. Add-ons, CSS, transition group. That is a mouthful. I'll give you that. All right, so hopefully we typed everything correctly, and now we have access to the React CSS transition group component, you could say, because add-ons are kind of treated like components as well in React. And in this case, what I want to do is I want to say what is the area that I want to have that would animate. For example, I could say I want to wrap the whole thing with an animation. Maybe I just want to do some sort of transition in. Now, to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and literally start a React transition group and finish a React transition group. And again, as always, make sure that you're starting it with an uppercase R, really critical. And let me also go ahead here and just start up our server because I'm sure it's done installing already. And as our server is starting up, let's go ahead and create our very first React CSS transition group animation. Now, the way it works is very simple. There's a few properties that you need to set. And the first property you want to set is the transition name. Now, that transition name could be really any name, but based on that name, you're going to be creating your CSS as well. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and give it a name such as app. So our name is going to be app, and our transition is going to be of the type of transition appear. So I'm going to transition appear, which will basically tell React and this component to start the transition right away. Now, the last thing that we have to set up is also set up the length of this animation. So I'm going to set here a transition appear time out, and I'm going to go ahead and set it to be 500 milliseconds. Okay, so I've just set my rules. Now, to be able to activate it, I'm going to go also into my app source, which is being loaded up here, and I'm going to go and add a bit more CSS. Because we called our CSS app, I need to call it app. There's ways to change it, but we're going to stick to the common default ways. And I'm going to set app appear. And I'm going to first of all define what is my starting point. And my starting point is going to be opacity of 0.01. We're going to start off from just a little bit of opacity. The next phase, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set here an app appear, and I'm going to app appear active. Now these are basically names that React is going to search for. Let me just break a few lines so we could see what's going on here. And in our next line, I'm going to go ahead and define what will be the outcome, the output of our animation. In this case, we want to go to opacity of 1, but we really could do any CSS animations that we wish to do. Last but not least, I'm going to go ahead and call a transition, a CSS transition, and set my opacity, because I'm only going to animate the opacity, and I'm going to set it to be the same amount of time as I've sent it in React. This is a little bit cumbersome and a little bit of an overkill if you ask me, but it doesn't really matter in this case. That's how they built it. That's how this plugin works. So personally, I'm just not a fan of the fact that we have to set our time twice. I'm just not a fan. And let me just fix that appear there and not let my dyslexia ruin everything. Let me double check that our server is running, which surely it is. And if we just go ahead here and click on refresh so we could see it as it's happening, everything should now fade in. Beautiful. That's exactly what we wanted it to do. We just created our very first animation. Now, before we're ready to create our next animations, we're going to take a loop back to fix a small little button issue that we have.